So the topic for today, why Oscar gets those slides up, is building a cyber resiliency through governance and compliance. I want to thank everyone coming. This was actually a request from several attendees of our events as we're kind of seeing the pattern that we're putting together on all the topics that we think are relevant for building a really layered security program. And this one actually touches right on that. So first two slides, I just want to do some introduction. My name is Chris Yule. I'm the VP of Sales and Strategy. Oscar Jones, who I'll introduce, is our CISO, works directly with accounts and also leads our delivery team of all of our fractional CISOs, risk managers, compliance managers, policy writers, that whole crew. This whole notion of building cyber resiliency has expanded a lot, I would say, in the last 18 months or so. It's not that this wasn't done before, it just wasn't done in any kind of blended fashion. There was, security recommendations, policies, governance, risk, and compliance stuff that was coming out of the world of the CISO. And then there were things that were security oriented coming out of the CIO or CTO world. And it's this blending factor that we're talking about today, which is really one of the most important elements to make sure that everything that is being done with intent, but through a unified vision of both sides of the house. As you see on the bottom there, the goal for all of this is that prevent, detect, respond, recover, and adapt. Everything we end up recommending or anything that you should see within security should really hit one or all of those things. And Oscar, if you go to the next slide, we put together a really simple slide and everyone will get copies of the presentation as well as the recording. You can kind of see where things are highlighted in green for you, everything that would traditionally fall under a GRC program. You're looking at data governance, you're looking at annual compliance testing or quarterly compliance testing, vulnerability management, vendor management, everything you see there. But everything in black, depending on your vertical, depending on your size, depending on your risk, are things that really should be considered to sit down and build this unified plan, this cyber resilient plan. And the only two things that are missing from there, and we're adding probably next week, is because we're already talking about it, but we're doing the marketing pieces behind it and the talk track. It's really around operational technology and also Quantum Day. The reality that Quantum Day is coming at the end of supposedly 2029, 2030. So even that falls into organizations that have either money to protect, secrets to protect, privacy to protect. Those kinds of things are also just all of a sudden came on the map, I'd say within the last like 3 or 4 months, that they were kind of just, tinsel and weren't included in this. So hopefully by the end of this process today, and we've got a lot of slides, so we're going to try to go through them without force feeding it too much. So we might be a minute or two late on the back end of this 30 minutes. You'll hopefully leave with an understanding of how this all works, how it interacts, what you can do, and where you can actually ask for help. On the next slide is really introducing Oscar. Oscar's going to kind of guide you through this. I'll add some color commentary. He's got 20 years of experience as a CISO in security. His role is so significant to what we end up doing. He works in lockstep with our CTO, who handles more of that technical side of the house, as well as all the compliance testing stuff. Happens to be a big Cowboys fan, so if you ask him, we will lose 29 of the 30 minutes on that. But Oscar,
Absolutely.
Thanks for taking time today to sit down and help everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris, and go Cowboys. We're going to the Super Bowl this year. All right. So we do have a lot of slides, as Chris stated. We may not get through all of those slides, but no worries. You will also get a copy of all of the documentation that we do cover today, plus any additional slides. So let's talk and get started with the governance and the foundation. Effective governance serves as a bedrock of cyber resilient organization. And why is that? Because without governance, you don't have any rules. And if you don't have any rules, then people can do any and everything that they want to within their environment. It's really about just making sure that everyone understands. And this includes senior leadership, because they are where the actual instruction should come from, with working with the CISO and various other members of the team, policy and clear frameworking and accountability. If you're responsible for a specific item, you need to be responsible for that. You need to be accountable and held accountable for that. So it requires leadership commitment, policy, and accountability. Those are the bedrocks of all governance and foundations. Leadership commitment. Why is that important? Critical drivers for a successful cyber resiliency program. This commitment transcends mere approval. It's not just saying, yeah, we're going to do it. Yeah, that looks great. It sounds great. We're going to make sure it happens. It involves active participation. And without that, things are going to start to fall apart. Things are going to start to basically kind of sink around, other priorities take place. Then you're going to start getting less leadership commitment. So that means your board of directors holds the ultimate responsibility, executive leadership and the management team. This is about strategic alignment with goals that are straightforward and detailed, resource allocation. Coming up with a great program is always the easy part, but if you don't have the resources to do it, you're kind of just talking. You're not really achieving any goals. You're actually kind of being stagnant. So you got to make sure that you have the right people in the right environments doing the right things. And this is what breeds the security culture, which is extremely important, because without that, you can do any and everything. You're basically living in a Mad Max world. You can drive, no rules. No one can tell you what to do because you're making all the decisions on your own. And we know that never works. So from a policy framework, translates leadership strategic vision into actionable guidelines. And why do we say this? Because everything that we do has to have an actionable goal. If you don't have one, then you're kind of spinning your wheels in the mud. So you think about cybersecurity incident response planning, documented and tested plan for swift response to incidents, anywhere from 2 hours to 48 hours. We've had situations where a customer will call us after a week of having dealt with a ransomware attack. By that time, some certain things that we can do, but because you waited so long, we now we're behind the 8 ball. We got to figure out how to get ahead of the threat actors and try to come up with a plan on how to get you out of it. And only 26% of organizations have applied consistently in response plans across the enterprise. And you may think that that's a very, very low number. And that's because it's a fact. 26% is all, and we're talking about worldwide. Only 51% have a specific response plan for ransomware. The only thing is most of them haven't tested that. So they'll actually have a plan, but they haven't done the tabletop. They haven't had a phone call with the team members. So they don't know exactly what they should be doing in the event of an incident. So data protection and privacy policy, controls for safeguarding sensitive data, compliance with regulations, GDPR, CCPA, we're all familiar with those. I won't spend a lot of time on that. Access control, rules for granting access based on principle of least privilege. Not everyone needs all of the access in order to do their job. They just need the least amount of privilege in order to actually do their jobs. Not everyone needs to be an admin. Not everyone needs to have, super user controls. Not everyone needs that. Often incorporates multi-factor authentication. We know that this is helpful. And third-party risk management procedures for assessing vendor and partner security and management of supply chain risk. Because as we know, third parties are usually what takes down a company. You're going to have instances where, it's an internal issue that goes about, but at the end of the day, most of the incidents that do occur are from third party, and they will push the limit because a lot of times they don't have a large company, they don't have a lot of resources, so a lot of your security will fall on the wayside, unfortunately. All right, accountability. Again, this is about the racing. Responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed helps clarify roles and ensure all cybersecurity tasks are assigned effectively. Board of directors, executive leadership, business unit managers, and all employees. So if you look down, if you see the RACI framework as an example, incident response planning, who's responsible? Who's going to be informed? Incident detection and business impact assessment, affected business units. This is usually when people either want to take accountability or be responsible for a certain aspect of their business, or they're going to step back in the fold and not say anything. And those are the ones you really have to worry about. But this comes through training and resiliency that you have to pretty much do on a consistent basis to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Risk management, the engine. So this is about moving organizations from a reactive to proactive posture. And I'll stop there. Now, we've heard about, reactive environments, and no one wants to be reactive, but most companies are. An event occurs, and when that event occurs, then they usually kick it off, but they're never proactively trying to protect their data or their clients' data. They say they are, but what testing are they doing? Are they actually going through the process? Are they asking the right questions? Are they bringing in the right individuals to have the right conversations? And a lot of times being reactive is what gets you in trouble, because now you always got to play catch up. There's no other way around it. If you're reactive, you're already behind. If you're proactive, you're at least ahead of the threat actors before they can get a hold into your environment. So this comes about with risk assessments, identifying critical assets. What do we have in our environment? What vulnerabilities do we have? Do we have any 0 days? Do we have any critical risk within our risk register that we have not tried to eradicate as soon as possible? What are our mitigation strategies? Implementing layer controls to prevent attacks and limit impact. Even if you do get in, do you have a honeypot set up in your environment? What about continuous monitoring? A lot of companies cannot do continuous monitoring because of the cost or the lack of resources. In order to get around that, you got to make sure that you have a company looking at that for you consistently, whether this be, maybe a CrowdStrike or an AT&T environment, BlackBerry. So it's really about the aspect of always knowing what's going on and what potentially could happen to you next. So what are the benefits? Not only defends against current threats, but adapts to future challenges, creates a dynamic defense that evolves with the threat landscape, enables organizations to protect critical functions and ensure viability, and facilitates strategic decision-making with risk-informed insights. Because when you're risk-informed, you know that your decision may affect another group. And so when you're having those conversations regularly, no one's surprised. And if you're like me, I only like surprises during my birthday and Christmas. Risk assessment methodologies, asset-based, identifies and values critical assets, analyzes threats and vulnerabilities, and determines potential impact of a security incident. How heavy laden is that issue going to be when you do have a ransomware attack? Is it going to take down your entire network, or is it going to be segmented so much to the point where even if a threat actor gets in, they will be blocked by a certain point because they can't go any further? So threat-based identifies potential threats and actors, analyzes capabilities, motivations, and the threat vectors, and evaluates organizational exposure to threats. So you want to make sure what is this threat actor looking for? What are they trying to get through? What are they trying to take from you? What kind of data points are they looking for? So you want to make sure you're asking yourself those questions on a consistent basis. So vulnerability-based identifies and catalogs vulnerabilities, prioritizes based on severity and asset criticality, and addresses specific weakness in systems and processes. This could be, they have an older machine. They have a 2012 server running in the background. They have Windows 95. And whenever I say Windows 95, people think about how crazy that sounds, but there are a lot of companies that still utilize Windows 95 for their environment. And a lot of them don't have that in containerized at all. So they're kind of out there in the wind, just waiting for somebody to find them. And when they do find them, they pretty much have access to all of your data unless you containerize that environment. So your framework integration, it's really about identifying function to develop an understanding of the risk to systems, people, assets, data, and capabilities. I think most of us are already using that. We have to definitely continue. So what are some of the mitigation strategies? Multi-factor authentication has been a lifesaver for more than one company, more than you could ever know about. Patching and hardening. Are you patching consistently every week, every 2 weeks? Are you doing the QA testing that needs to occur? And do you have a true network segmented environment? Now, what procedural controls do you have? Incident response planning, backup and recovery, third-party risk, as we stated before. Human-focused controls, employee training creates a human firewall. And, a human firewall can actually prevent a lot of attacks. And if not stop them completely, they can slow them down. Because people love to, if they see something wrong, they'll tell you in a heartbeat. Especially if they didn't have anything to do with it. If they had something to do with it, they may come to you a little bit slower. But if they didn't have anything to do with it and they see something, an anomaly that's going on in the environment, they will immediately tell you, hey, we have a possible breach. Please take a look and let me know, what do you see next? because they may be able to tell you before you actually get a notification on the system. And then access control, principle of least privilege. And then cross-sector cybersecurity performance goals provides a baseline of high impact practices for organizations to prioritize. The reason this is important is because if you don't have a prioritization, if you don't have a breakdown of steps that need to actually occur, then you'll always be missing something. Or something will drop off the calendar and you don't remember it. Somebody's not telling you. And then you've got to kind of hurry it up in the back end, try to fix it. You don't want to do that because that takes time away from other things that may be occurring in your environment. So let's talk briefly about continuous monitoring. It's constantly evolving. It always will, especially with, the more and more the AI becomes even more prevalent than it already is. But vulnerabilities emerging regularly. Continuous monitoring is essential for vulnerabilities being monitored on a regular basis. And it's really about enabling organizations to adapt their defenses. Because, and let's take it as a football analogy for a moment. If you have a strong offensive line, then that means that the defensive players won't be able to get to you, your quarterback or your running back very quickly, and they'll be able to set up the play properly. Same concept for continuous monitoring. If we can change, if we see that they're figuring out what we're doing, then we can take the next step. We can always move the needle. And so in order to do that, you got to have real-time visibility. Got to make sure that you're looking at it on a consistent basis, but looking at it, today, and then tomorrow, and the next day, and then looking at it from a performance perspective. You're looking at key performance indicators, mean time to detect, mean time to resolve, and this is something that we've been talking about for years, because your mean time to detect, you want it to be under, I would say under a second, to be honest with you, and your mean time to resolve is going to average depending on what level of the ransomware attack that is occurring, but also give you an effective process on how to look for certain areas for improvement. And then regular framework reviews, they should be reviewed frequently, especially I would say every 6 months, to adapt to new threats, because we know that threat actors are always looking for the easiest way in, and proactively gathering and analyzing information. Extremely important, because without that, how do you know what's happening in your environment? What do you know? What do you know is going on in your house if you're not doing a perimeter check every once in a while? Just walking around to see what has changed, what looks a little different, what should you shore up? Extremely essential, something that we should all do, not only just consistently at work, but also with our home network as well. So let's talk briefly about compliance and the framework. While governance sets the direction and risk management identifies threat, compliance ensures that cybersecurity resiliency efforts meet legal, regulatory, and industry standards. And you may think, wow, that's a lot. We got to do legal and regulatory and industry standards. And the reason is because you want to be the best of the best. And yes, I know I used the term for Men in Black from many years ago, but it is still the case today. You want to have your legal standards. You want to make sure you have enforceable requirements and significant penalties for non-compliance. If your employees aren't following the rules and the steps that need to occur, you got to make sure that you're calling them out. You got to make sure you're having the right conversations. You got to bring in HR or making notes on a consistent basis. And then regulatory requirements, industry specific mandates, compel implementation of specific controls, and then standards and frameworks, common language for security. We don't need to use 1,000 different monikers and acronyms. We can just tell them the truth of what we're looking for, what needs to happen, how it needs to occur, and who needs to be involved. If you keep it simple, people will usually follow you. If you make it complicated, it makes it a little bit more difficult for individuals to actually understand exactly where you're going. And then that goes down to the audit and reporting and verification of the controls and assurance to stakeholders. Because if I can show you a report that actually shows you exactly what we're doing and what we're doing right versus what we're doing wrong, people will understand that. You just got to make sure that you're showing them the right information and up-to-date data. So a structured security, translate external requirements into internal actions. And you notice I didn't say reactions because we're trying to stay away from being reactive as opposed to proactive. Continuous improvement moves beyond reactive. Checklist-driven activities become a strategic enabler. And then stakeholder trust provides assurances to leaders, regulators, and customers that security controls are currently in place and effective. Chris, is there anything you wanted to add on that, sir?
No, I mean you're really covering everything, Oscar. I mean, I think the ability to understand kind of the blending of these pieces as you're kind of getting this really again reinforces the layered approach side of things.
Mhm.
The ultimate goal is obviously to protect the data, right? To protect whatever the assets are, money, passwords, privacy, whatever. So I think you're doing a great job with that.
Thank you, sir. So regulatory landscape. So GDPR imposes strict data protection and privacy rules for organizations handling personal data of EU citizens. Requires data breach notification within 72 hours. When GDPR first came out a few years ago, there were a lot of companies that actually folded because of the strict controls that GDPR houses. I give you a perfect example. If you are walking in front of the Eiffel Tower and someone takes a picture of you and tags you in that photo, you actually have the right to contact that particular individual or company and have them remove it without a fine. If they do not remove it, you can actually, there's a $500 fine for every notification that you give them. So they have to follow GDPR. It's taken seriously, and the fines can be incredibly steep and steeper for clients that do not follow the rule sets. HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's been around for quite some time, but it establishes security standards for healthcare data, PHI, EPHI, pretty much all of those. And then PCI, I'm actually working on several PCI projects currently, outlines technical and operational requirements for protecting credit card data. And I think I've mentioned in some of our prior meetings that, you know, place like Chase, JP Morgan spends $500 million on security controls every year. And they still have a lot of issues where your credit card number will be hacked. Sometimes not through either, your own issues. It could be just one of the databases was breached. They won't tell you that the database was breached, but when you get a new credit card, you know something occurred in the background. NIS 2 directive and EU-wide legislation on cybersecurity imposing stricter security and reporting obligations. As this becomes more and more prevalent, it is going to become even more crucial when you're looking at certain parameters within doing business within the EU. And I think you're going to hear more about it within the next 6 to 9 months. The key insight is that these legal requirements compel organizations to implement specific security controls, thereby enhancing their baseline. Now, we talked about NIST in the past. The focus is risk management, voluntary risk-based framework, 5 core functions: identity, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And then for ISO, ISMS, formal certifiable standard requirements for establishing and improving. And then SOC 2, service organizations, auditing procedure for service providers based on the 5 trust services criteria, which is security, availability, processing, integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. So I know that most of the individuals on this call are already very familiar with those, so I won't go into detail. Did
Yeah,
you have a
one thing I
question?
want to add for those that maybe aren't as mature in this process, we have gotten, customers in the past, and if you're not a customer CyberSecOp, I encourage you to have this conversation on where you should be and what might be an interim step, right? Where you can find let's call it a lighter weight standard to start getting cultural and technological advancements in security, get some policies in place, get some procedures in place, knowing that you want to get to ISO or SOC 2. But, it's kind of like weight loss. If you got to sit down and lose 50 pounds, setting interim goals is the way to have positive reinforcement and comfortable achievement rather than kind of looking at the long run and how long it's going to take to get there. So we see that is actually a great way to sit down and actually approach this if in fact you're starting from, we did nothing to we want to do something.
Thank you, sir. All right, audit and reporting. And I know we're coming close on time, so I will try to go through the last few slides, Chris, and then I'll hand it over to you, sir.
Yep.
Demonstrating compliance requires rigorous auditing and transparent reporting to provide assurances to stakeholders. Internal audits, one way to do this. This is usually, the individuals that you have in your environment, the IT engineers, or the network engineers, and the analysts. External audits performed by independent third parties, which is extremely important in order to keep certain certifications. and continuous reporting, regular reports on compliance status, and inform senior management and the board. Stakeholders receiving insurance leadership, regulators, customers, and partners. Extremely important to do so. Now, integration, the force multiplier. This requires more separation of governance, risk, and compliance functions, but they can be woven together in a cohesive strategy aligned with business objectives. Extremely important to talk to your business groups because they may have some different parameters that they need to have covered in order to adhere to certain controls within their purview of their customers. Establishes strategic direction, authority, and accountability. Risk management identifies and evaluates and mitigates threats, and compliance ensures alignment with legal, regulatory, and industry standards. And for the cohesive strategy is really about moving from reactive to proactive, benefits of integration, eliminate silos between departments, and aligns security with business objectives. GRC platforms, governance, risk, compliance, and operations, the key capabilities. Unified risk management. No need to even go down that path. We all know what it means. Policy management, policy creation and distribution across enterprise, and make sure that everyone understands exactly what they need to do and what controls need to be assigned. Automated compliance, automated controls mapping to regulations, simplifying audits, and advanced analytics using AI for real-time visibility. So the real world impact, government agency streamlined GRC programs. American Family Insurance defined a single source of truth for IT risk management, and Gartner predicts over half of major enterprises will use AI for compliance by the end of this year. Over half of major enterprises will use AI. That's amazing, but I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. Change management, securing leadership buy-in, establishing clear processes, fostering a security culture, and regularly testing. If you see at the bottom, the testing challenges, 74% of organizations don't apply their change management process consistently, and 40% test without a set schedule, and 35% only test once a year. So how do you think they're doing at this point if they're only testing for a 1 year time frame? Not very well, because there are certain controls that they're not adhering to. And unfortunately, that's not going to change because of resource constraints or CapEx that they need in order to control. Measuring effectiveness, maturing models and benchmarks, NIST cybersecurity frameworks, partial, risk-informed, repeatable, adaptable. And then you look at the maturity model developed by the U.S. Department of Energy, and then CISO, Cyber-Resiliency Review, CRR, and then the cohesity, destructive cybersecurity, or cyber attack resilience model. Preparing, identifying, containing, eradicating, and recovering. And as you see, we have a breakout of the key performance indicators: mean time to detect, resolve, incident response time, and posture improvement rate. It's extremely important because you want to know how well you're doing today versus tomorrow. All right, building resilience. This is the integrated foundation. GRC integration transforms security from disconnected activities to a unified proactive defense. Adaptive defenses, really just being able to pivot as soon as possible and as quickly as you possibly can. Measurable progress. Measurable has to be, you got to look at your KPIs and say, okay, we did decently in the first quarter. We did a little bit better in Q2. We're going to do great in Q3 and Q4. And then the human element, this comes down to the human firewall we spoke about earlier, and then the sustained commitment from senior leadership. It has to be sustained. It has to be consistent. Key takeaways: conduct a joint risk assessment, identify potential risk and threats that impact your overall governance, risk, and compliance posture, and develop a unified governance framework. Integrate GRC into your security program to ensure alignment, consistency, and efficiency. Chris, I'll hand it over to you, sir.
Yep. So go back one slide for a sec. So one of the things that we mentioned, if in fact you are an organization that's kind of, just starting to get into the process, part of that assessment is going to give you that benchmark of where you are. What we also do is we can help recommend, or any partner that you look for can give you a recommendation of where your midpoint is to where you want to get to. Inside of that GRC platform that Oscar touched on, it actually helps you understand those benchmarks, where you are. If you sat down and just took math as a category in general. Obviously, it's got a, geometry and calculus and all that other stuff, but you understand where you are from a high school perspective, from a community college perspective, from a four-year perspective, and maybe MIT perspective, right? What's kind of transferring, what actually applies, what are my grades as I kind of move across, what am I getting credit for? It's called crosswalking. So that whole process incorporates everything that you've kind of heard about in that collection, but the GRC platform will help give you moment to moment analysis of exactly where you are, and then with your CISO would understand what those steps to continue to mature would be on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. Oscar, on the next slide. So as Oscar kind of mentioned, whether it's CyberSecOp or someone else, you definitely want a consultation to understand exactly where you are. If you have had an assessment from a legitimate organization, typically we would accept one that's been done within 6 months with testing to sit down and kind of figure out the remediation process, because we have had customers that want to separate out the assessment from the remediation. But in either case, that is really your starting point to know where you're going to go and how you want to move forward. And that customized roadmap is, like we said, it's about your industry, it's about your size, it's about your culture, it's about your starting point, it's about your budget. Like, all those things are going to come into place as you build this customized roadmap, and you should then find an organization that will help construct it as well as lead you through it. Last slide, Oscar. We're just 4 minutes over. We will get you copies of the slides, copy of the recording. You definitely can set up a meeting with us if you'd like to. This was intended to be educational, but if you want to have a one-on-one with one of our CISOs, whether that's Oscar or someone else, we can set that up. And then these are the next three webinars that are coming up in the series that we've been running. And I really want to thank everybody. Oscar, thank you especially for presenting, and those of you that were able to make the time and invest in this topic. I'd really thank you one more time. Have a great rest of your summer, and we hope to see you soon. Take care.